Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Sophie and today's video is going to be a big book unhaul. So before I get into the video, if you enjoy it, please remember to like the video, and if you want more bookish content from me, please remember to subscribe. So let's get into the unhaul. I do actually sell a lot of my books on Vinted, so if you're interested in any of them, I'll leave my Vinted link below. So first up is a special edition of Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson. In my opinion, it's not really very special. I liked this book when I read it, but I don't need two copies of a book that I just kind of liked, so this one's going. Then we have A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. This is a fantasy romance inspired by Norse mythology. I did read this a few months ago and I really didn't like it, so no reason to keep a special edition, but such a shame because it's such a pretty edition. So another book I'm going to be unhauling is The Gods Below by Andrea Stewart. I read this one recently, gave it a 3-star. I just don't think this author is for me. I've read The Bone Shard Daughter by this author and I didn't really enjoy that either, so I'm going to be letting this one go. And then we have Sorcery and Small Magics by Maga Ducey. This came in a fairy loot again, and this really does not sound like my thing, so I'm going to be unhauling this one without reading it. We then have Forged by Blood. Again, I read this a few months ago. It was a 3-star. I'm not continuing the series. Don't really need to keep this one. Then we have In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune back when it first came out, and I liked it. I didn't think it was really anything special, and I just really couldn't get into this one. This one is about like androids and robots, and it just is not really my thing, so I didn't actually even read much of this one, so this one can go. We then have The Curse of Saints by Kate Dramis. Again, I read this quite a few months ago. I rated it like a 2.5. It's an adult, but it reads very YA, and I didn't think it was all that good, so this one can go. Then have Shanghai Immortal by A.Y. Chow. I tried to read this one in a video and I literally got about 50 pages in and I just couldn't continue with it. The main character, honestly, like, I just couldn't with like this character. The character was so immature and said, yeah, I just couldn't with the writing style in this one, so I didn't even read this one. We then have The Scarlet Alchemist by Kylie Lee Baker. Nothing wrong with this one, it's just not really my cup of tea. I read maybe like the first 40 or 50 pages and decided to DNF this one. We then have The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzon. I couldn't even finish the first chapter. I really didn't like the writing style for this one. It was way too overly descriptive. And again, it's such a shame because it's such a pretty book, but yeah, I'm not reading this one and therefore not keeping it. We then have Sing Me to Sleep by Gabby Burton. This is about like sirens and fae, and I DNF this one after 50 pages, mainly because it just seemed like it would just be okay, and I'm not really into YA that I'm just going to rate like 2.5 or 3 anymore. Yeah, this one can go. We then have The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. Again, this is another one that's absolutely stunning. It's like a cozy fantasy, and this sounded like I would enjoy, but the writing style I just really didn't enjoy. The characters felt very like marionette puppets. There was no personality to any of them, and I really couldn't continue with this one. We then have Evocation by S.T. Gibson. If you watched my last book unhaul, I unhauled The Dowry of Blood. I didn't even finish that one. I did finish this one, and it was like a 2-star read. It's supposed to be about like tarot cards and demon summoning and stuff, and then the romance just completely takes over, and I really wasn't interested in the romance. So yeah, this one I think I gave like a 2-star, and I won't be reading any more from this author. We then have The God and the Gumiho by Sophie Kim. I've read a few books about gummihos and stuff, and I just can't really get into them, and this really doesn't sound like my thing at all, so I'm going to be unhauling this one. This one I haven't read. And then same with this one, A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal. I have read from this author before. I really enjoyed the We Hunt the Flame duology, but I was not interested in this one when it was announced. It's like, again, like cozy fantasy, tea magic, and then it turned up in a fairy loot, and I was like, well, I feel like I have to read it, but it's just not my thing, so I haven't even read this one either. We then have Threads That Bind by Kika Hatsupulu. Again, I haven't read this one. It just doesn't really sound like my thing, and I'm not going to read it. We then have The City of Stardust by Georgia Summers. I have heard nothing but negative things about this book, and it's got a really low rating on Goodreads, and it really doesn't sound like my thing, and I would never have picked it up if it wasn't in a fairy loot, and guess what, I'm not reading it either. I then have 2 fairy loot copies of The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leong. I don't know what happened to make me have 2 copies of this, but this really doesn't sound like my sort of thing either. It's a cozy fantasy about trying to find yourself and finding a family instead. Perfect for fans of Legends and Lattes, A Psalm for the Wild Build, and The House in the Cerulean Sea. Well, as I've said, I didn't really enjoy House in the Cerulean Sea, and I'm not interested in Legends and Lattes and Psalm for the Wild Build, so I don't think this book's going to be for me. So there we go, 2 fairy loot editions that I don't want. And then I think the last of the hardbacks is a special edition of Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare, and I just don't really think this is actually a very pretty edition, and I already have, I think, a special edition of Lady Midnight, so I don't need this one that I'm not really even that fond of. Okay, so moving into the paperbacks, we've got Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. This is a historical fiction. I've had this for quite a few years and I've just had no interest in picking it up. I think as I've learned this past year, my tastes have really changed and I'm just not really interested in this kind of genre anymore. And then kind of similar for A Book of a Thousand Days by Shannon Hale. This is like a YA fairy tale retelling, but it reads very young. I think I only read like the first 50 or so pages and I just couldn't continue. I then have the entire trilogy for the Girls of Paper and Fire. So that's Girls of Paper and Fire, Girls of Storm and Shadow, and Girls of Fate and Fury by Natasha Young. I've read the first 2, I haven't read the third one, and I think I just waited too long to get the third one, and I'm just really not interested in this series. I'd have to reread the first 2 to read the third one, which I'm not interested enough to do, so I'm just going to call it quits. I then have Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This is a paranormal romance that I read quite a few months ago now, and I really didn't enjoy it. I do enjoy Ali Hazelwood's work, I just didn't enjoy this. Paranormal romance I don't think is really for me, so I gave this one 2 stars and don't feel the need to keep this copy. I then have Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. This is a science fiction book which I did enjoy when I read it, but it was just kind of like a 3-star, and then I got the second book from my library and I just had it out for ages and I didn't pick it up, and I feel like that says it all. I don't even want to read it even when the book's free, so yeah, I'm going to be unhauling this one. I then have the Atlas 6 and the Atlas Paradox by Olivia Blake. I read the Atlas 6 maybe a year or so ago and I did enjoy it, and then I tried to read the Atlas Paradox earlier this year and I just really was lost, and I'm not interested enough to reread and then continue. I think I'm just going to call it quits, and yeah, I'm just not really into like dark academia novels. I then have the entire Arusha and the End of Time series, I think this is called, by Roshani Chokshi. So that's Arusha and the End of Time, The Song of Death, The Tree of Wishes, The Nectar of Immortality, and The City of Gold. I have read the first 2 books in this series and I'm just not really interested in continuing. The first 2 books were only sort of like a 3-star, and I know I'm not the intended audience for these, but I'm really not picking up middle grade anymore, so I think these would be better off going to someone younger who would actually enjoy reading them, as this is the whole series. Another entire trilogy I'm getting rid of is the Kingdom of the Wicked series by Kerry Maniscalco. So that's Kingdom of the Wicked, Kingdom of the Cursed, and Kingdom of the Feared. I've read the first 2. I really enjoyed the first one, didn't love the second one, and I tried to read the third one and I can't do it. I'm not interested. It's too different from the first book, which is what I really enjoyed, so someone else can have this series. I then have Among the Beasts and Briars by Ashley Poston. Again, this is kind of like a cozy fantasy, and I think with Ashley Poston, I don't really enjoy her fantasy or her sci-fi that she writes, but I do enjoy her romance, so I think I'm just going to stick with her romance. I'm just not really interested in this one anymore. I then have a fairy loot edition of Twin Crowns by Catherine Doyle and Catherine Webber. I've had this for a couple of years now, and I'm just not really interested in reading it. It is a pretty edition, but I'm not really into YA fantasy anymore, so I'm just not interested. I don't think I'm going to pick this up and read it, so this can go. And then I have A Princess of Souls by Alexandra Christo. I did read To Kill a Kingdom by this author and I enjoyed it, but apparently this is like a sequel and that was supposed to be a standalone, and I've had it for a few years. It came in a fairy loot as an extra book and I'm just not really interested in reading it. Again, I'm not really into YA fantasy all that much anymore, so this can go. And then finally, and probably the most controversial, so please don't come for me in the comments, is I'm going to be unhauling the first 10 books in the Wheel of Time series. So I have read the first 7 and I do like this series, but it's been months now since I read that 7th book and I just have no interest in continuing that series. It's very slow, it's very political, which I do enjoy, but I just feel like for the thickness of the books, not a lot really happens in it. And I know that, you know, it will probably all pay off eventually, but I don't want to read a 14-book series just for it to get good in like the last 2 books or whatever. And I know sort of in the middle of the series, I'm coming into the slog and I just don't want to do that to myself. There's too many books that I actually want to read, and I gave this a good go and I can't do it anymore. So like I said, I read the first 7 and then 8, 9 and 10 I haven't read. So these are The Eye of the World, which is in the older style covers, The Great Hunt, The Dragon Reborn, The Shadow Rising, The Fires of Heaven, Lord of Chaos, The Crown of Swords. So that's where I've stopped. And then I also have, oh, that's not in order, The Path of Daggers, Winter's Heart, and Crossroads of Twilight. So as I've said, these are all going up on my Vinted. I'll probably maybe sell that series in 2 halves. But if you want any of these, check out my Vinted. Yeah, that's going to be it for today's video. I do just want to put a little disclaimer, you know, this is not necessarily to say these books are bad or any means, they're just not my taste or I didn't enjoy them. We all have different tastes in reading and that's okay. So please don't be offended if I've unhauled like your favourite book, because it's really not personal. But that's going to be it for today's video. So like I said, please remember to like if you've enjoyed it and subscribe for more bookish content. And I'll see you in the next one, guys. Bye!